2 years ago, I was sitting in a friend's office, and I noticed this old weathered photograph on his wall. I said to him, "What is your dad doing with Peter Sellers?" He said to me, "It's from the biggest film ever made here. It was a pirate comedy set in Kyrenia, and my father worked on it." That was it. I just couldn't get it out of my head. A Hollywood film starring Peter Sellers and made right here in Cyprus. But why hadn't I heard about it? Why hadn't I seen it? I Googled it, and sure enough, there it was. Ghost in the Noonday Sun. It was shot for Columbia Pictures, and it also starred Spike Milligan and a bunch of other top comedy talent. But the more I delved, the more interesting it got. Turns out the whole production descended into chaos and became a complete nightmare for everybody involved. Mainly because Peter Sellers decided, once he got on the island, that he didn't want to make the movie. And he did everything he could to sabotage it. Somehow they managed to finish it, but Columbia rejected it, and it was never released. I became totally obsessed with the idea of this film here, and I traced all the actors, the crew, anybody that had any association with the film. Everything pointed towards making a documentary, mainly driven by seeing Kyrenia on the big screen, because nobody had seen this movie. It was just after the banking collapse, and there was this incredible sentiment where we all wanted to do something, anything, just to raise morale and put Cyprus back on the map. I decided that this might be my way of helping that cause. Incredibly, I found out that the original director, Peter Medak, was still alive. So I just had to speak to him. I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we could bring him back here and get him to tell all these stories? By some miracle, I managed to get his personal email address, and I spent 2 weeks crafting it. It couldn't be too long, couldn't be too short. It just had to be right. I figured I'd only have one chance at this. So I sent it to him. Amazingly, 10 minutes later, I got a response. He simply said, "Call me." I did, and we spoke for 4 hours. And one of the first things he said was, "Oh, it was an absolute living nightmare." He's originally from Hungary. He's got this fantastic Hungarian accent. And then he proceeded to tell me story after story of how it just got completely insane. He said things started to go wrong even before we started filming. The Greek captain that was sailing this amazing pirate ship we built from Athens, who'd been out on the open sea for 2 weeks, was so paralytically drunk when he arrived, he crashed the boat into Kyrenia harbor. When they did manage to fix the boat and they went out and they started filming, they realized that they'd built the masts too tall. So the slightest breeze and the whole boat would rock violently. Everybody got seasick. Sellers was furious. He said, "You can't shoot comedy like this." The next day, he fired the producers, and nobody ever fires the producers on a movie. The day after that, he fired the cameraman. And then he turned his sights on his friend Peter Medak. Things went from bad to worse. On the 5th day, Medak had set up this amazing tracking shot on 12 Mile Beach in Kyrenia, where Sellers and the pirates going to walk across the sand dunes. Medak calls action. They all start walking. Seconds later, Sellers grabs his chest and falls to the floor. Oh my God, he's having a heart attack. Everybody runs in. They put him on a stretcher and they take him to the hospital. After some examination, the doctor comes out and says, "Look, he didn't have a heart attack, but he's exhausted. Give him a day off. Give him a day of rest. Send him back to his villa." That's what they did. The next day, they go to get Sellers. And his driver says, "Look, he's still not right. He needs another day." So they leave. A 3rd day, the same thing happens. After a 4th day, they're not shooting anything. Medak's sitting in the harbor. And somebody delivers the newspapers from London from the day before. He's sitting there. He's looking through them. Turns the page. And he sees a photograph of Peter Sellers having lunch in London with Princess Margaret. He'd faked the whole heart attack and somehow managed to get off the island. And we still have no idea how he did that. But as he told me story after story, I realized for Medak that the wounds were still very much there for him. He'd been a very hot young director before making this movie, widely considered as the Tarantino of his day. But after this film didn't come out, it took a number of years for his career to pick up again. But I was delighted that he agreed to be a part of it. So over the next year, I had hundreds and hundreds of hours of Skype calls with Medak. He never slept. All these calls were always almost in the middle of the night. And for the first year, I only saw the top of his head, the way that he positioned his laptop. During the course of these calls, he'd say things like, "Oh, don't you think it would be amazing if we speak to Roger in London? Don't you think it would be amazing if we speak to so-and-so in LA?" I'd say, "Fantastic, Pete," and then scribble down, "add $10,000 to the budget." And this went on and on and on, and the budget ballooned to 15 times the size. Then one day, Medak says to me, "You know what? I'll direct it, and I'll do it for free." I said, and looking back on this moment, he must have thought what a complete idiot I was, because I said, "But Peter, that's my job." Obviously, after very little thought, I realized what an opportunity it was. So now we had this incredible story, a Hollywood director, and a massive budget. Right from the beginning, I thought, how difficult would it be to find the money? Surely everybody would see the possibilities. I mean, it was a great opportunity, just for Cyprus, for tourism, for everything. And I thought this part of the journey would have been easy, but unfortunately, after months and months of chasing official channels here, well, it didn't turn out exactly how I'd planned. I would just have to find the money myself, so I Googled it, how to finance a movie. 5 hours later, I had it figured out. We had to create what's called an investor's offering. Now, that was the easy part. The difficult part came to present to people, to get in front of them, to try and sell them the project. 99% of the time, they'd say, "No, well, leave it with me or I'll get back to you." It just went on and on and on. Excuse me. But I became obsessed with it. And I kept, I write lists, I sent emails, I hounded people, I pushed boundaries with friends, family, acquaintances, basically anybody I ever met. It got to the point where every sentence I started was with the words, "Peter Sellers." I could see people seeing me in the street and then they'd run off. It just went on and on and on. But on the other side, it was overwhelming how many people did actually support the project. Their belief in me and the project itself, really. And not just from family and friends. I mean, complete strangers too. Then one day, Medak says, "I know we're not doing this for money, but what happens if it's a hit? Don't you think I should benefit?" I said, "Peter, of course. I mean, we're partners in this. There's no question." "Good. Send something to my lawyer that's going to kill me." So I did. Well, I bought a book first. I bought a book, and it was called Everything You Need to Know About Entertainment Law. Big mistake. It wasn't just about contracts. It was full of nightmare stories of what to look out for when you're making a film. That's when my sideburns started to turn grey. Eventually, after about 5 weeks, I wrote this basic agreement, and I sent it to his lawyer. In one of the first revisions I got back, he added 3 letters, DGA. What did that mean? I looked it up. Directors Guild of America. Basically, my production now had to become a DGA production, and I had to sign this 128-page agreement. I downloaded it, I read it from cover to cover. It made no sense to me. I couldn't understand. It was no use. I had to get my own Hollywood entertainment lawyer. A friend put me in touch with one. I called him up. "Hello, you've got 3 minutes until I start charging you. What is it you need?" I said, "Well, the first thing I need is for you to look over my simple agreement with my director. How much do you think that's going to cost?" "I don't see it costing more than $10,000. Silence. "You've got 2 minutes left. What else do you need?" I thanked him and I hung up. It was no use. I just signed the agreement, and not for the first time in this project, just threw caution to the wind. I just had to make this film. Few weeks later, when we were setting up interviews for London, Medak said to me, "Listen, I'll refer to you as my producer. You refer to me as your director." I said, "Peter, I'm not really comfortable with that. I'm just some guy from Nicosia." "Bullshit," he said. "I'm a Hollywood director. I work for you. That makes you a Hollywood producer. So now, So now I'm a Hollywood producer making a Hollywood direct documentary about the biggest Hollywood film ever made in Cyprus. I mean, it's totally insane. Then came the moment I'd been dreading, which was to call in all the investors' money. It was different when it was on paper. Now I really would have obligations for it to work. couple of nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night with a nightmare. And the nightmare was this: the euro had been falling. And because up to this point, we'd got 75% of the money. And I thought, Christ, have I changed the euro rate in my spreadsheet? I jumped out of bed, drove like a lunatic to the office, opened the spreadsheet, put the new euro rate, and there it was. 22% of my budget just evaporated with a hit of a button. I thought, oh God, did I come this far for this kind of thing to happen? This sort of stuff doesn't happen to Hollywood producers. Or so I thought. As it turns out, all the ones I've met since have far, far worse stories to tell. But after a couple of days of putting myself back together, I decided we just got to get on with it, and we decided just to shoot London and Cyprus. LA would have to wait till later. So off to London we went. It was absolutely amazing experience. We met all the key players from the movie business in the 70s, Sellers' family, his friends, the remaining actors, cast and crew. We even managed to put together 3 of the remaining directors of Sellers, who all shared their war stories of what it was like working with him, which was a movie in itself. Now, I mentioned we'd had some luck before with Medak's email, but I just want to tell you one story from London. We were shooting this producer in this pub in Kensington. Everything was going really well, when suddenly this lovely little old man shuffled in and walked straight through the shot. A couple of minutes later, he appeared in the doorway, and he said, "Pardon me for asking, but what are you fellows doing here?" I went over and I explained. He said, "Oh, Peter Sellers, what a lovely man. I used to be his doctor." That's exactly how he spoke. And you're not going to believe it, but this doctor was, I told you the heart attack story when the Sanjis, and he came back with his fake doctor certificate. This was that doctor. I mean, it was a billion. There was 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance. And what was even more astonishing was that he hadn't been in that pub since 1968. And the only reason he went in was because it was raining. Obviously, we bought him a few drinks and persuaded him to be in part of our film, and now he's in our story. But Medak and I began to feel that Milligan and Sellers were up there messing with us. And that wasn't the only time we felt like that. It was a difficult experience for Medak going back to London. Once he started tracing his career and meeting with people that he hadn't seen for many years, he'd grown up there from the age of 17 as a Hungarian refugee. So he went on this roller coaster of his own. And he really actually got quite upset at a couple of points. But I wondered, would it be different when we brought him back to Cyprus? Returning to the scene of the crime, as it were. It was emotional for him to return 43 years later. He'd woven this kind of nostalgic idea of what Cyprus was back in 73, but obviously everything had changed. Our first day of shooting was at Nicosia Airport, which was in the UN buffer zone. It really upset him a lot. But what upset him even more, and he was inconsolable in the beginning, was when we took him back to Kyrenia. It wasn't how he remembered it. What was so interesting was that when we started to meet with locals that had worked with him on the film, because now they had this incredible connection, as they now had become refugees, as he was a Hungarian refugee. And this added a completely new layer to our film. We then started to do reenactments of the insane things that happened on the film. And this is one of my favorite stories. In the middle of production, Sellers went to Medak and he said, "Darling, I need you to shoot me a commercial at the weekend." He said, "What do you mean? I can't even get you to act in the film, and now you want me to shoot a commercial on my day off?" Well, you just couldn't say no to Sellers, so he agreed. So that weekend they start shooting this commercial. And it was set in the Kyrenia Customs House in the harbour. And the idea was it was full of gold, and Milligan and Sellers were going to steal it. So they start shooting, everything's going well. Then it comes time for what's called the pack shot, which is the advertising shot. So Medak says to Sellers, "Look, just hold the cigarette pack, flare it in the sun, and jam it in the alarm bell." Sellers says, No, Daddy, I can't do that. I don't want to touch the pack." Medak says, "What do you mean you don't want to touch the pack? That's the whole point of the story. You putting this in the alarm bell is what allows you to get in and steal all the gold. Why won't you do it?" Sellers says, "Well, I'm the chairman of the Anti-Smoking League, and I'm not allowed to touch cigarettes. Medak says, are you totally insane? I mean, how can you agree to make a commercial for cigarettes and not be able to touch a cigarette? I mean, you're just a lunatic. So then he thought about it for a minute, and he looked at Spike Milligan, who was standing over there very quietly, and he went over to me and said, Spikey, as soon as Milligan starts backing away, he says, don't ask me, don't ask me, don't ask me. And he kept backing up, and he fell off the harbour into the water. They pull him out. All the time he's saying, don't ask me, don't ask me. I don't want to say no to you. Medak goes over to me and says, Spikey, why the hell won't you do it? Spikey says, he looks down, and he says, well, because I'm the vice chairman of the Anti-Smoking League. And I'm not allowed to touch cigarettes either. I mean, it's totally insane. I mean, you just couldn't write this stuff. We then took him to 12 Mile Beach, which is where a lot of the filming went on. And he was absolutely elated because nothing has changed. It was exactly identical to 73 because it was a turtle nesting ground. And I just want to talk a little bit about Medak, the director, as a director. We arrived there in middle of the afternoon, 40-degree heat. He looks around a bit and he goes, I want to shoot up there, pointing to the sand dunes. I said, Peter, you can't go, it's impossible. You know, and it's dangerous. No, it isn't, and off he went. With us clambering behind him, and we were half his age or even younger, and we just couldn't keep up with him. Well, he got up there, and then he stayed up there for 2 hours in the blistering heat with drones flying around telling the heart attack story. When he finally came down, I went up to him, I said, Peter, you know, why would you do that? Why would you take that risk? I'm your producer. You scared me half to death. He just put his glasses down under his nose, looked me straight in the eye and said, but darling, that's where the best shot was. I mean, that to me explained everything about what kind of director Medak is. By this time it was sunset, and there was a guy blowing a whistle for us to get off the beach because of the turtles. Medak said, well, can I go for a swim? I said, right, quick, go on. As he was getting undressed, we could see these turtles pop their heads up out of the water, look around and go back down again. Medak points to him and says, you see, they remember me from last time. They think I brought that lunatic Sellers back here and they know he's not going to come out. There was a definite calm in Medak by the time we finished filming. He'd put a lot of things to rest. So he went back to LA and I went back to looking for the rest of the money. Over the next 7-8 months, we've found some more investors. We even run a crowdfunding campaign, which went well, but we didn't get all the money that we wanted. But there was just this urgency that we needed to finish shooting. So in February, the Oscars were happening, and everyone we wanted to speak to would be in town. So in another leap of faith, we just decided to book it, and we went. And I'm happy to say everything worked out really well. We got everything that we needed. So where are we today? Well, we're getting closer. There's a little bit more shooting that we want to do, but essentially we've moved to the task of putting it all together. And we've also started getting some really quite interesting press and exposure, and this has led to a number of offers or expresses of interest from big distributors. So I'm now more convinced than ever that we really are creating something quite special. But in another insane twist of events, a couple of weeks ago, I was contacted by one of the world's biggest comedy stars, and he wants to option our story. So now, somebody might make a Hollywood movie about our Hollywood documentary, which is about another Hollywood film. It's nuts. But the best thing about it all is that it's all right here in Cyprus. It's been an incredible journey for me so far, you know, full of twists and turns, elation, disappointment. But what I've learned from my darling friend Medak in terms of filmmaking is incalculable. What I've learned about mixing at the highest levels of Hollywood, if you like, is that there really isn't that much of a difference between them and us. But what I've learned most of all is that it really is that old chestnut of being in the right place at the right time and having that magic ingredient called luck. And to think all of this started with a photograph on a wall. Would I do it all over again? Of course I would. Thank you.